From the farmhouse to the White House, from peanuts to presidency, Jimmy Carter, America's best buddy and neighbor, or so they thought. Jimmy Carter, a previous governor from Georgia, portrayed himself as another one of the citizens, and he created a contrast between the corrupt presidents of the past and his promise of, "I'll never tell a lie." Differing opinions rose surrounding the new president.
In 1974, when the candidates for the presidential election of 1976 were announced, I was personally just looking for a candidate who wasn't so corrupt. When I heard the name Jimmy Carter, I thought, who's that? Once we learned more about him, we saw that he was a religious man when we watched him lead prayers on the television. He seemed trustworthy, and his religious beliefs made us feel much more comfortable with who we were voting for.
Speaking on behalf of all the congressmen, we never expected to ever see Jimmy Carter in office. Jimmy Carter appeared out of nowhere. He grew up in Plains, Georgia, and worked on a peanut farm. He was just a common citizen and has barely any political background.
I am so proud of Carter and all of his accomplishments. He is the change that we wanted to see in America. I was honored to stand by his side as vice president. He had the best intentions of any politician I've ever met, maybe because he was not a politician.
Carter presented himself as an outsider, as one who wasn't associated with Washington politics, and this is what made him so appealing to the public. The election of 1976 was a close one, with Carter gaining only 51% of the popular vote and 297 electoral votes. However, after all, Jimmy Carter was the new president of the United States. The American population yearned for an all-American, wholesome friend more than an assertive president. His crisis of confidence speech on July 14, 1979, spoke to the issues of American government, morals, and way of life.
A nation that is at peace tonight everywhere in the world. It is a crisis of confidence.
Carter talked about the energy crisis and the recession, but he concluded that the root of all economic problems lie within the lack of morality and confidence. One of Carter's main focuses in domestic policy was oil imports. In terms of domestic policy, as his term carried on, people began to see some of the flaws within his presidency, and tensions rose between Congress and the president. The policies, or rather the absence and failures of policies at home, painted a very poor light on Carter's domestic policies. Tensions grew between Congress and the president as Congress doubted the experience President Carter had in politics.
My. When we first elected Carter, we were truly looking for a change. But it turned out we were changing for the worse. The energy crisis really took a toll on my family and I. We were only allowed to get gas on specific days, and Carter wanted nothing to do with it. The press was able to keep us updated with the news, and they were quick to show all of Carter's failures and the issues with Congress. Our country was turning into another embarrassment. As the energy crisis was going on, the unemployment rate was at 8%. People were getting laid off right and left, and it took Carter a while to take action to help the citizens.
As Carter settled into his presidency, it became apparent to us that he was unfit for the job. He attempted to pass many laws through us that were denied. Every one of these bills that were attempted to be passed had no structure and made no sense. One of these bills was in fact his idea of gas rationing plan that made virtually no sense to us at the House of Representatives and Congress. When we denied him at the access, he made remarks in the Oval Office claiming that Congress has to take responsibility and realize the magnitude of the issue. If he only knew that we were focusing on a multitude of problems at the time. The appeal of him being an average citizen began to wear off as he wrote his bills with little experience. He became frustrated with us at Congress, and he began to veto our actual laws. We quickly found that Carter had a hit list of 19 acts that he swore to veto if Congress attempted to pass. This cat and mouse game got tiring. His massive failures outweighed the small successes.
Although Carter was a calm, patient, and humble man, he was stern. He had a couple of successful acts. For example, to end unemployment, he gave $4 billion into public works programs, $5 billion in tax reductions, and expanded the job market to 425,000 jobs. In theory, he was quite successful.
As for foreign policy, Jimmy Carter believed it should reflect American morals. One of Carter's biggest successes was the Camp David Accords. During this meeting, Carter met with Egyptian President Anwar Sadat and Israeli Prime Minister Menachem Begin. At the time, the Israelis were occupying the Sinai Peninsula. The president of Egypt wanted the Israelis to withdraw from the occupied territories. The tension between the two countries were rising, but Carter set his mind to resolving this issue. Through Carter's gentle deliberation and persuasion, he had Egypt and the Israelis sign a peace treaty. Additionally, he got Israel to retreat from the peninsula. Unfortunately, that was the extent of Carter's success of his foreign policy. One of Carter's most infamous failures was the Iranian hostage crisis. During the Iranian hostage crisis, when 66 members of the embassy were held hostage after Carter let the Shah of Iran come to the U.S. to receive treatment, many Iranians were angered and felt that the Shah betrayed them. After this, President Jimmy Carter implemented an oil embargo on the Iranians, which backfired, plunging the country into an energy crisis. The United States relied immensely on the Middle East for oil, and therefore, gas prices rose, gas lines became longer, and the nation began to run out of oil.
The general public was not necessarily notified of the foreign policy that was happening up in Washington. What we do know is that he kept up his nice guy persona with his foreign affairs. When we found out about the Iranian hostage crisis, we knew his passive way of dealing with matters was going to nip us in the butt. He took his sweet time trying to help the hostages, and the longer he took, the worse we felt about our home country. I did not know much about the issue, but what I do know is that our government was not as capable as it used to be.
Congress viewed Carter's approach to the Iranian hostage crisis with embarrassment of our government's incapability to fix this issue.
President Carter did his best to fix the foreign issues overseas. Day in and day out, up until his very last day in office, Carter worked on trying to free the hostages in Iran. He did everything in his power to try and help these hostages, but due to the media, which seems to be out of control these days, Carter was portrayed as the passive coward who was unable to save men of his own. He was a focused man, and he would be able to accomplish anything possible. Speaking of which, Carter was a very successful man in the Camp David Accords. During this time, Carter was able to bring new peace to the Middle East that was never found before by a previous president. This was a great success for Carter and his foreign policy, but alas, this success is overlooked due to some misconceptions about his effectiveness overseas.
To the general public, Carter left office without having left a satisfying legacy. He is most remembered for his lack of aggressiveness regarding the Iranian hostage crisis. On November 4th, 1979, Iranian students broke into the U.S. Embassy and took more than 60 American hostages with the intent to stop America's interference in its affairs. Americans were infuriated that Carter was unable to release the hostages back to America. It wasn't until the day he left office and Reagan was inaugurated that the hostages were released. Because of this, Carter was left without any credit regarding the release of our people, and it is believed by many that he did not do enough to get them home.
At the end of the day, Carter let us down. Although he was one of the people, he was almost two people-like and too little politician-like. We will always remember Carter in one way or another, but I'm fairly sure it's not how he would have liked to have been remembered.
The Iranian hostage crisis was what really messed up the relationship between Congress and President Carter. He had violated the Wars Power Act, which required Congress's approval before going into an armed conflict. Not only did he do a poor job of getting the Iranian hostages released, but President Carter also failed to pull the United States out of its economic slump, and the inflation of gas prices did not help his causes.
If you ask anyone these days, they'd probably not rank Jimmy Carter as one of their favorite presidents. However, speaking as someone who worked alongside him for 4 years, I could easily say that President Carter worked just as hard as any other president. Although he is not the best politician, Carter-led prayers and spiritual redemption was just what the country needed at the time.
Despite his poor relationship with Congress and his failure to bring American economy back to normal, Jimmy Carter truly embodies the American spirit of rising from peanuts to presidency.